right, what's happening? What's happening? So how we doing?
Pretty good.
All right, cool. Y'all should be doing good. There was free alcohol out there. I think it was free alcohol. Or just an alcohol-free campus. Yeah, I spoke at Oakwood University, and the entire campus is vegan. I said, I'm sorry. I was like, I don't know what the hell y'all talking about. I need some meat. So y'all gonna hook a brother up. And so that was an experience there. So it was all good. Certainly glad to be here. You are welcome for the weather. I spent a week in Hawaii. I was in Maui for vacation, and also after I left Maui, I went to LA for the NBA All-Star game, back to DC, and then New York, and then I was back in LA Friday for the American Black Film Festival honors, and so it was gorgeous weather there. So I was sitting there going, man, I got to go to Buffalo in February. I was sitting there thinking, who on my staff shall I cuss out? Yeah, I lived in Chicago for 6 years, and so it's some places in America you skip October 1st to May 31st. Just kidding. But it's all good. But it is hard to pack though, because I was sitting there going, man, I'm going to LA. I got to bring this big wool coat, scarves, gloves, and everything, and so. Got to the airport and they said, your suitcase is heavy. I'm like, yeah, winter gear. So, but it's all good. It's all good. Also, I want to say, so they told me, so you have an overflow room, so you got the stream over there, and also, so wherever I go, my followers always want to go places as well. So I'm gonna do this here, cause see, as I told the high school students earlier, I said I may be 49, but I'm always still up on technology, and so we're actually live streaming this. To all of our social media accounts. So let me see, so I'm gonna turn the camera around. Okay, so y'all can wave, okay? All right. Let them know you're alive. Wave right there, there you go. All right, cool. All right. Trust me, your president does not mind the free publicity. I've got 2 million social media followers, and so yes, I'm like, absolutely, that's good. Glad to see all my Alpha brothers here. Thank you very much for the presentation. Of course, we're not far from Ithaca, New York. We were founded at Cornell University. I'm going to be there tomorrow, actually not at the university. I'm interviewing Dorothy Cotton, one of Dr. King's lieutenants, for a special we're doing, tackling the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination on April 4th, 1968. And so I'm looking forward to chatting with her. She doesn't get many interviews, and so thank goodness she's a huge fan of mine. And so we're looking forward to that. I also want to thank all the folks who have come up to me the last 2 days and talked about them seriously missing News One Now. Of course, for 4 years, that was... for 4 years, of course, that was the daily show that we had on TV One, and so many people really appreciated that, and folks have been hitting me up all over the country saying, you got to go somewhere else, what are you doing? And so I'm like, calm down, I'm working on something. I said, when you know, I'll let you, I said, when you know is when I let you know. And so I am working on that, and so, because it is important for us to be able to have different voices speaking to the issues that matter to us. Last year, we celebrated 190th anniversary of Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper founded in the state of New York, actually in the country, but was founded in the state of New York in 1827. And that lead editorial in that issue, they wrote, "We wish to plead our own cause, too long have others spoken for us." And so it's amazing that here we are 191 years later, and you still have a dearth of voices in mainstream media, but that is also has been by design. I'll speak about that in just a little bit as well. And so all of these things matter because there were so many stories that we covered every single day that you would not see on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and all those different networks. So many different voices you would not hear. One of the things that I was telling some of your students earlier today when we had a small intimate conversation is that to understand what happens when you have the power to be able to change the face of the media is that it always makes us when I see people today and they talk about my girl Angela Rye being on CNN, and they talk about Paris Denardis or Michael Singleton and all these different people. These are all the people who I put on TV first. See, those networks will not give those folks a shot when they didn't know who they were. They just simply said they didn't exist. And so, but all of a sudden, by giving them a platform and giving them an opportunity to show who they are and what they can do, then all of a sudden they began to be hired by those places. When you see Paul Butler giving legal analysis on MSNBC, he was a frequent guest on the Washington Watch My Sunday show and also News One Now. And so I can go down the line with a number of people who literally got a shot. When you see Scott Bolden or Monique Presley or Yodit Twelday giving legal analysis, I was the first ones to put them on television as well. And so don't think for a second the other networks were not paying attention. So I once tweeted, I said to CNN's Jeff Zucker, their CEO, y'all should be telling me thank you. Because the reality is I personally diversified their airways more than they did. And I said, but it's okay, you can hire every single person who I put on the show because I have a whole new crop of folks I will put on the air. And if y'all hire all of them, I will then go find a whole new crop of people to put on the air. Because it's really not that hard to find these amazing, talented African Americans who can speak on politics and law and news and culture and entertainment. You just simply have to open your eyes. And all too often, too many of these executives make excuses in terms of not being able to open their eyes. And the same thing happens all across this country. You've got some amazing students out there who would love an opportunity to be able to go to college, to be an opportunity to be able to experience that life, but if only we have folks who are recruiting from universities who understand they must look beyond their own space and realize that sometimes if you just look just a little bit harder or just ask somebody, or in fact just hire some black folks on your staff, you might be able to do that. So that really is one of the issues I still believe we have in this country, which I am going to deal with in a second. So thanks to everyone who invited me to speak. Let me say this up front. If you came looking for rah-rah, if you came looking for, you get the yell, scream, whatever, that's not what's going to happen. Because see, I have the ability, well, I say it this way. My wife is an ordained minister. If you wanted somebody to give you comfort, you wanted somebody to hold your hand, you wanted somebody to pray with you, y'all should have invited her. She's a great speaker, she'll do a good job, she'll do all that stuff. That's not why you invite me. God gave her a wonderful spirit of comforting people. God gave me a spirit of discomfort. Anybody white in the room? Trust me, the black people are going to be just as uncomfortable as you. And I say that because I believe one of the most fundamental problems we have in this country is that we are too comfortable. That we have gotten comfortable in terms of what we've been able to do. We've gotten comfortable in what we have been able to achieve. And as anyone knows, when you get too comfortable, you don't have the same edge. You don't have the same willingness to take risks. And so it's about being a little uncomfortable. So let's take a look at your title. Your title is called Our Past, Our Progress, Afro-American Society Celebrating 50 Years. But I want you to think about this a little bit differently. And so I am going to tag my text. So then let me stop right there. Now, somebody sitting next to you who just said, what the hell does tag your text mean? Okay, so I want you to turn to that person and say, okay, in a black church, whenever you hear tag your text, that means that's what the preacher has called his sermon or her sermon. And so that way, I don't want that person sitting there going, all right, going, what is tag your text? Because what happens is somebody's going to ask you, what are you talking about? And you'll be like, I have no idea. I either fell asleep or I tuned out. So at least you will know the name of this speech, and you can just give them that and it'll be all good. So let me tag this text, the next 50.
All right.
The next 50. See, one of the biggest mistakes, I believe, we make during Black History Month is that we spend an inordinate amount of time talking about Black history within the context of what has already happened, as opposed to what is actually happening right now and what is going to happen in the future. Now, I know somebody's looking at me saying, especially the professor saying, but it's called history. Yes, it is. But there's a thing called past history and living history. And so if you don't quite understand living history, then you won't understand the next 50. The reason I'm saying the next 50 is because we often gather and we talk about what other folks have done with these great achievements in our society. And we talk, of course, we'll go from Frederick Douglass to Denmark Vesey, and we'll talk about Ida B. Wells Barnett, and we'll talk about Robert Abbott, we'll talk about Alice Dunnigan, Ethel Payne, we'll talk about Hosea Williams, and we'll talk about Ella Baker and Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy, and then we'll go to Constance Baker Motley and Diane Nash and Dorothy Cotton, then go to Reverend Jackson and Andrew Young, then we'll go to Stokely Carmichael, Fannie Lou Hamer. We'll go to all these different people, and we'll talk about all these things that have happened in history as opposed to the reality that these were people who were living in a period who said, I am here to make not just my life better, but make life better for my children's children.
Yeah.
See, that's a much more forward-looking view, because what they understood was they were not going to be the beneficiaries of the very things that they were actually fighting for. See, next year in this nation, if we actually are paying attention, and my Lord, it's stunning that we will be dealing with this under Trump, next year we'll be commemorating 400 years of the first 20-odd Africans arriving in Virginia. That took place August of 1619. We begin to think about that. We begin to think about the fact that you then had 244 years of sanctioned legal slavery in this country. Then, of course, that all culminated with the Civil War. And then, of course, when the Civil War was over, let's just be clear, if you truly understand history, slavery was not outlawed as a result of the Civil War. If you actually read the Emancipation Proclamation, you will realize that only applied to those states that seceded from the Union. And then you begin to look at that, look at the compromises that we had all across this country when it came to slavery. See, when we talk about this issue of race in America, we've always had to compromise on the issue of race. See, it hasn't been a situation where it was simply wrong, morally wrong, legally wrong. No, we've had the dance that is taking place. Well, maybe we can do some of this, but not that. Maybe we can do a little of this and not that. That has really been the story of America. And so those 20-odd Africans, and then the millions who came after them, there's just been this constant drumbeat, this constant itching for freedom. See, I didn't say equality. Black folks have not wanted equality. Because the problem in America is equality means a law has to be passed. No, what African Americans have been saying is we want freedom. The root word of freedom is free. And what I mean by freedom, we've been saying, is we want the exact same thing that white Americans have, and that is the ability to be truly free in every way whatsoever. In fact, the moment a child comes into this country, we want to be free. We don't want to debate it. We don't want to legislate it. We don't want to negotiate it. We simply just want it. Now, see, that's troubling for some people, because when I say that, somebody look at me saying, well, but you're actually free. No, let me truly put this thing in context. I said next year, 400th anniversary, 20-odd Africans arriving in Virginia, 244 years of slavery, 12 years of Reconstruction. Then you had the Great Compromise of 1877, after that was a contested election in 1876. And so they said, fine, we'll make Hayes president. Tilden was running against them, so Democrats said, well, look, we'll make Hayes president if y'all remove the last federal troops from 3 remaining southern states. Grant was president. He said, no problem, we'll go ahead and do one of those states. Hayes comes in, removes from those 2, and they said, we promise we will not mess with the black people, we'll leave them alone, everything will stay the same. That was the biggest lie ever told. And so then what happened after the Great Compromise of 1877, Jim Crow was then ushered in. You had the Civil Rights Act of 1860, then of course you had 1883, the Supreme Court outlawing the Civil Rights Act of 1875. And then you had those states that began to kick out blacks from Congress and the United States Senate. And you had even black Republicans who were saying it was an abomination that what took place. And then we nearly went through 100 years of Jim Crow. And you had all of these different efforts, A. Philip Randolph, the Pullman car porters, and then you begin to have the Black Freedom Movement, starting, of course, with Emmett Till being lynched and killed August 28, 1955 in Mississippi. Then, of course, a few months later in Montgomery, December 1st, 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott started. And then, of course, it led to 381 days of resistance, culminating in the Supreme Court declaring segregated busing to be unconstitutional. That they then moved from there. They moved to Birmingham and Selby, Albany, New York, Albany, Georgia, and the Nashville movement, Reverend Jim Lawson. Then all of a sudden they began to go to Lowndes County, which was actually the origination of the Black Panther Party, not what happened in Oakland, but it was the Black Panther political party in Lowndes County, Alabama. Then it was Mississippi, and it was all of these different things. And then, of course, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And then, of course, the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65. King gets killed April 4th of 68. A Fair Housing Act passed 8 days later in 1968. And so I always use this point that if you want to talk about when black folks have been technically fully free Americans, technically, I use 1970 as the marker, which means that African Americans have only been technically fully free for 48 years. See, the problem is when we talk about this country, we talk about, well, slavery was just so long ago, but we act like Jim Crow didn't exist. Jim Crow was simply slavery without shackles. And so the reason I use that, because if you look at that particular movement, because again, the Fair Housing Act was passed after King was killed. See, there was a block in the United States Senate, and then of course you had Everett Dirksen who made it clear, I'm not going to bring it up in the Senate until they overrode the veto. And then of course it moved to the House, and it was LBJ who sent a letter to Congress on April 5th saying there's no greater way to honor the legacy of Dr. King unless we pass the Fair Housing Bill, something he was fighting when he went to Chicago in 1966. I'm saying all of that is because if you use 1970 as that marker, that means that when I was born on November 14th, 1968, it means I was born into America where I was not fully free. College students today, if they are the first generation of African Americans born fully free, it means that, like, I don't have any children. I have 9 nieces, 4 nephews. It means if I had children, that means my children, in this case my nieces and nephews, are the first generation of African Americans in the history of America to be born fully free, technically. Because we still are having to deal with the remnants of white supremacy, Jim Crow, slavery, and everything that is taking place in this country. So when we begin to have these conversations about where do we stand and all the progress that has taken place over the last 50 years, we must acknowledge the reality that if we are focused on this in 50 years, that really was the start of this effort. And if anyone knows, it's a whole lot you can do in 50 years, but there's a whole lot that has not been taken care of in 50 years. See, one of the fundamental problems with this country is that we are so good at moving on. So I told you Reconstruction lasted 12 years. And understand that, I don't care where you go. You can go to many places and you can say Reconstruction, and most of the folks in the room have no idea what you are talking about. They have no idea even the period of Reconstruction and what Reconstruction even means. See, I make it perfectly clear when I'm talking to folks to understand the 3 most important things that happened, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. Those were the Reconstruction Acts. And to understand what African Americans have always done, King said black folks are trying to redeem America. African Americans have always been the ones to tell America, we are going to show you, or we want the America you say you are on paper versus the America you are in real life. That's always been the story of black folks in America. So when I talk about 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, those were not simply beneficial to African Americans. When I talk about the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68, those did not just benefit African Americans. African Americans have been, there's no other group in the history of America that has tried to make America live up to the American ideals than black folks. Okay, some of y'all don't believe me. Fine, let me put it in this particular way. 1972, Congress passed Title IX. Title IX, we think about it today within the context of sports. You see them talk about Title IX, women's sports, but the reality is Title IX was not passed because of sports. Title IX was passed to open the professional schools to women. That allowed women to all of a sudden become doctors and lawyers and dentists and engineers and professors. Now, if you ask most of those folks, where does Title IX come from? They look at you like you're crazy saying, I have no idea. Title IX is a provision of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now, no group has benefited more than Title IX than white women, which means that white women in America have been able to benefit from a law that was passed as a result of the blood black folks shed to make it a reality. If you meet somebody who is Latino, or if they're Korean, or if they're Vietnamese or from Thailand and they're voting in elections in their native tongue, tell them you should be thanking black people. Because you cannot vote in your native tongue if the ballot is in your language were it not for the 1965 Voting Rights Act. You better thank Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was killed, of course, at a night march in Selma. You better think Bloody Sunday. You better think James Reed, who was killed as well. You better think Bayo Liuzo from Michigan. You better think all those folks who were killed trying to get the right to vote. That's how that act was passed. And so you can't say, oh my goodness, I love being able to vote in my native language if you don't thank black people for making sure the 1965 voting rights happened. When I meet folks who are gay and lesbian, who are excited about same-sex marriage, I tell them, y'all better thank black people too. Because there's no same-sex ruling without the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment, one of those Reconstruction Acts. When you meet somebody who is disabled, tell them, thank black people too. Because the American with Disabilities Act is a provision of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I'm laying all of that out because African Americans have always said to America, we are going to fight you tooth and nail for our freedom, and while we're doing it, other folks have been able to benefit from it, and unfortunately, they have benefited more so than we have still in 2018. See, it's hard for some folks to hear all of this because the problem is they have grown up on listening to his story and not history. And if you don't understand history, then you can't understand today. And if you don't understand today, you can't understand tomorrow. It's shocking to people how basic some things are. I was talking to the reporters earlier, and I had no plans on talking about it during the speech, but it came up when they were talking, and then I had no plans on talking about it with them, but all this stuff was just in my head, and just somehow it'll come out. I was talking to your president and the mayor earlier. I don't write speeches. I don't have any notes, and so I don't lay it all out. I simply allow God to walk into a room, discern who's in the room, who needs to hear what, then what comes out my head comes out my mouth. But this thing is so basic. Do understand that even how America constructed freeways was designed to separate. You got Donald Trump talking about building a wall, but expressways in America were built to specifically separate communities. We are driving on highways and just going all about our business, not understanding. Look to your left and to your right, and you'll see exactly why the highways were built. It was not for mass transportation. It was to say, keep black folks over here and white folks over here. That is the story of America. It's the story here in Buffalo. It's the story in New York City. It's the story in Chicago. It is the story of America. And when we begin to look at Today, when you begin to see the studies, in the average white family in America with $110,000 in wealth, the average African American with $5,000 in wealth, and then whenever I'm having these debates on television, folks are sitting here saying, well, I don't understand, why can't black folks get it together? And I'm going, black folks have always got it together. We were simply beaten down and left out by so many other folks. Because when you begin to break down redlining, when you begin to understand how economics were used against us, frozen out of jobs, there's no greater affirmative action in American history than the GI Bill. And then when you had white soldiers coming back from World War II, being able to go to college and being able to get loans and buy homes and buy appliances, and then you have the story of black soldiers who literally were fighting white soldiers in the train stations when they got home. Here they were fighting for the same country, same flag, and they had to fight other white soldiers who were mad they were in the military, and then some folks had the audacity to get mad at Colin Kaepernick. See, don't think for a second. I didn't read the story the other day of the wife of the Buffalo Bills owner. Him and his wife. They own the Buffalo Bills, and she was talking about how we have to find some common ground, find some solution. She said, find some compromise, because she was upset that protests are getting in the way of commerce with the NFL team. And I'm reading this story saying, boo. Please tell me how many times you and your husband are going to go down to the city council meeting and say, why are we having to expend taxpayer dollars for police officers who are brutalizing its own citizens? Please tell me when you want to stand up for that. See, the reason these NFL owners, including Buffalo Bills owner, don't like what's happening, I love it when they say, well, no, we talk to the players and we support them. No, you don't. Because, see, you're not willing to use your power and your resources to change why they are protesting. See, I don't want to hear some statement from any NFL owner. I don't want to see you lock arms with the players if you want to do that on the field just to satisfy your sponsors. I want to know whether or not you would actually be a change agent for what they're talking about, because the problem is this here. There's not a single black NFL owner which speaks to economics in America. You also have NFL owners who will not go by any of these communities unless there is some punt, pass, or whatever program going on. But they got no problem wanting you to spend $300 on a jersey for an athlete, but then not really care about where that athlete comes from. And the reason the players are saying we will do this protest because we got to get your attention. And here's what's so amazing. If you look at polling data of the NFL protest, that was the first time in the history of America you had that many people who actually agreed with a black protest. You cannot show me anywhere in America where a majority of white folks have said, hey, we love y'all protesting. That has never happened. Because America has never liked to look at itself. America has always loved to challenge other people. America loves to tell China about human rights abuses, but ignore what's happening in police departments in America. America loves to talk about what's happening with women in Saudi Arabia, but America does not want to truly confront human sex trafficking. America does not want to talk about how kids in other countries cannot be educated when you still have black and brown kids in America who are using old textbooks, who are going to school where there's no air conditioning and no heat, and then you trying to say it's the same equal education system. No, it's not. America has never minded being a hypocritical nation. We love to challenge other people and ignore what is happening in the country. And the reason they have never been happy with black folks demanding freedom, because black folks in America are the living embodiment of mirrors. When you see African Americans in America, you're actually looking at a mirror of America. And see, that's a little uncomfortable for us because we have gone through this whole thing of we're the greatest nation in the world. God has loved the nation more than anybody else. Oh, look at the resources that we have. Look at, we're this economic superpower. We're this military superpower. But you can't talk about America being an economic superpower unless you deal with the reality of how America became an economic superpower. You can't talk about how all of a sudden you were able to use the resources that frankly were free, and then all of a sudden you saying how you became an economic superpower. When I had the white supremacist Richard Spencer on my show, he had the audacity, the unmitigated gall to say America became a superpower after the Industrial Revolution. I said, well, how did you get the money during the Industrial Revolution to be able to do what you did? So you can't ignore that. And then also, let's not also play the game of when people say, oh, no, but see, that was those folks from the South. No, there was also folks from the North, because you had some insurance companies in the North that was insuring land and insuring property called slaves called people of African descent, called human beings. See, that's how America became a superpower. Go read the book, The Other Half Never Told. You can't deny that reality. But see, that's just not during slavery. I was speaking at a builders conference, and I was talking to a woman. Her job in North Carolina, her job was to ensure that companies were not front companies. So she was talking to these two guys, and they were the sons of the founder of the company. They're the largest construction company in North Carolina. She said, how did y'all get started? She said, well, our father was in World War II, and then when the war was over, they had some surplus equipment. And Daddy said, well, since it's surplus equipment, can I have some of this equipment? Because Daddy said he wanted to start his own road construction company. And so they said, sure, go ahead. So he got the surplus road construction equipment. And so to this day, they're the largest construction company in North Carolina, doing millions and millions of dollars. You can't show me a black soldier who was able to walk off the base with a shovel. So to understand lineage, here are two sons running a multi-million-dollar company Daddy started because he got surplus military equipment, which means their children will pick up a multi-million-dollar construction company by virtue of what their grandfather did, when American history shows us that the very same black soldiers could not even walk off with a shovel, and those same black soldiers could not access the GI Bill, and those same black soldiers could not buy homes in certain neighborhoods, and then they would only buy homes in black neighborhoods where they were jacked up 3 to 4 times more than that. And then when they resold the homes, they barely resold for more than what they bought them. And so therefore, unlike their white counterparts who were able to sell a home for a much higher price, take the proceeds from that, invest that, and save that, that's how you get today the average white family in America with $110,000 in wealth, the average African American with $5,000 in wealth. We can bring this thing, track this thing back, and you can show how this happens. So then when people say, well, I don't understand why blacks have not gotten so far along, it's called look at the history. He got a company, we got, thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, when the same black soldiers walked out of World War II after saving America, some got lynched in their uniforms. So some of those same soldiers could not go into places. Medgar Evers was a veteran. I'm laying all of that out because if we don't understand any of that, we can't understand today and then realize what must happen over the next 50 years. So what is happening in America right now? What's happening in America right now is there is massive white fear in America. Now some of y'all might be saying, hold up, I'm not scared. Let me explain that. There are people in this country who cannot handle what is happening and what is about to happen. Now let me break this down. How many of y'all remember 30 years ago when the stories came out saying America will one day be a majority minority country? Folks said, man, that's going to be so far away. I'm going to be dead. I ain't going to be here. Well, some things happen. White people stop having babies. That's fact. Don't get mad at me. I was not in the bedroom watching Seinfeld and Friends. They should have taken the TV out the bedroom and handled their business. African Americans and Hispanics kept having babies. To understand where it is now, in 5 years, the average death rate of whites in 7 states of America will surpass the average birth rate. That's a fact. And so what was supposed to be 2060 became 2057, then 55, then 52, then 50. Opioids hit. Whites are taking opioids, but see, let me break that down for you. This is the one time in American history I can appreciate racism. No. This is a fact. This is a fact. Studies show white doctors would not prescribe opioids to African Americans because they thought we were coming to get high. Told us to take Advil and Tylenol. No, I'm telling you. Y'all think I'm lying. They would not prescribe opioids to African Americans, and they kept prescribing opioids to white people. White folks got hooked. That's why you saw folks in Connecticut and Vermont and New Hampshire in the Republican primary crying on TV, Lord, don't put our kids in jail. And I'm like, where were y'all during the crack epidemic? So it's a fact. The average white life expectancy has dropped due to suicide and opioids. It's not that black people are living longer. White folks are living fewer years because of the opioid epidemic. That's the only time I've ever said racism, thank you very much. And so America, so you take all of these things I'm talking about, and now by 2043, America will be majority minority. Whites will make up 47% of America. And so what is happening is, there are folks who are seeing what's going on, like, hold on, we can't handle this. No, numbers don't lie. When you begin to look at the studies, begin to look at the surveys, I tell you this, 2009, Obama gets elected. A study was done, and the question was asked, are you optimistic about the future of America for your children? Every group, black, Hispanic, Asian, more than 50% said yes. Less than the majority of whites said no. And you're going, huh? September 2016, the question was asked, are you optimistic about the future of America economically for the next 10 years? Every African American, lowest wealth, highest optimism. Latino, second lowest wealth, second highest optimism. White Americans, highest wealth, 41% optimistic. And you're going, wait a minute, how you got the highest wealth and you have the less optimism about the future of America economically for the next 10 years? It is because you have folks who are upset that they got to now compete. I saw a story, there was a guy, he was Erie, Pennsylvania. He said, I wish we could return to the days when I worked at the plant and I could simply get my son or daughter a job when they were ready to work. And I'm sitting here going, but you're describing what we couldn't do. When I was watching during the election, Morning Joe, I was watching one morning, they said, we got a problem, the wages of white men have only increased 2 or 3% since 1973. Then they said the wages for black men increased 12%. And I'm listening, I'm going, what the hell were the wages for black men before 1973? They were so low, of course they went up more than white men because it was non-existent. What I'm trying to say is that there are people who are literally afraid of what's going on. Listen to the buzzwords. Our culture is changing. How? Because the problem is when you have said mainstream, you've actually meant white. I'm in media. Folks would say that. I remember, y'all, true story, 2007, 2008, I did a pilot at CNN. I got Obama to agree to do the pilot. Yo, a pilot never airs. He'd already announced he was running for president. I got him to agree. Did the pilot, we were talking about health care, and I was talking about 2000, my appendix ruptured, Democratic National Convention, had to have surgery, more than nearly $100,000 in expenses, didn't have health care. 4 years later, had to file for bankruptcy, almost lost my home. I said, health care, I said, that hurt a brother. The executive vice president for CNN, Ken Giles, we were in his office. He said, you really shouldn't use the word brother because we don't want to scare off white viewers. And I looked at him, I'm like, cause a brother? And then he said, I showed my wife this clip and she agreed. I was like, wow, his white wife agreed. Yet Glenn Beck, who was hired, would say brother all the time on the air, and it wasn't a problem because they saw two black men saying brother. And not one time did he think, how did you get the guy who's running for president to agree to do a pilot? He was focused on brother. So what you have right now, you have this fear. Understand American history. Whenever whites in America have always went through economic angst, they begin to point at somebody else. All these attacks against illegal immigrants, that's the reason we don't have jobs. No, it's not. You don't have jobs in small town America because of automation. When last time y'all been to a bank? No, seriously. Raise your hand if you've been you've been to a bank in the past 6 months. A majority of the people in this room have not been to a bank. Why? Because you can take a picture of a check and deposit it. You don't need to see a teller ever again. Massive numbers of jobs have gone away because of technology. Yet people are saying, no, you're the reason, and you're the reason, and you're the reason. No, that's not it. You have fear that's going on in this country, and it is fear that is misplaced. America has gotten to become a better nation because of different cultures. America is better off because you have different people. You can't celebrate the Statue of Liberty and can't stand immigrants. And so we are going through this battle, and see, this thing is so deep that a lot of people have no idea what they're even saying and even where it's coming from. So I'm saying all this to you because we have to then understand how do we deal with it moving forward, and that it requires us not to be afraid to confront the reality of what's happening in America. And what that means is we must begin to look at people who we know in our family, in our churches, in our living places, in our spaces, and to begin to confront them where they are. See, that's the real deal. I'm working on a book about this whole issue, what's happening with white fear and how it's driving our policies in this country. When you have folks in Alabama who would rather vote for an alleged pedophile than, but do understand how that's impacting policy. It's impacting so many facets of our life because it's fear that is driving us, and it makes no sense whatsoever. And so the only way we begin to change this is when folks begin to wake up and begin to realize that the nice, wonderful friends that we have, they are saying and doing things around us, and frankly, we haven't challenged them on what they're saying and doing, and then we're saying, well, why are these things happening? It's because too many of us are quiet. If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. Listen to Dr. King. He literally wrote this in Chaos or Community. Where do we go from here in 1967? When he said it didn't cost America much to allow us to go to hotel rooms and to swim in swimming pools and go to parks. He said the question is, will America now write that large check? That's the real question. And he said the biggest folks who will stand in our way will be our white allies. That's what he wrote. See, part of the problem when we talk about Dr. King is too many of us have fallen for what I call that bobblehead figure of Dr. King, where he's become a civil rights mascot in America, as opposed to realizing the radical revolutionary that he really was. If your only understanding of Dr. King is I have a dream part, the bottom part, not the whole speech. If your idea of King is I've been to the mountaintop part, which is the last 2.5 minutes, not the previous 42 minutes, then you have a different understanding of exactly who he was. We are living in a time that requires people of conscience to go beyond where they are to say, how am I going to be a difference maker and change this city and this state and this country for my children's children's children? The decisions that you make today will have a direct impact on what kind of nation they will live in by 2043. 2039, the majority of the working class in this country will be minority. The question is, will America in 2043 look like South Africa, where you will have minorities who are now in the majority, but when it comes to economics, it will simply be inverted even more so than it is now? That should be a scary proposition, because what we have to understand, if you want to understand America, you must follow the money. If you don't believe me, go to Washington, D.C. You will realize that there's only one federal agency that shares a lawn with the White House, the Department of Treasury. Power, money, money, power. That right there explains America. And so where we are going depends on what we do today, the decisions that we make today. How many of us who are black, who are white, who are Hispanic, who are Asian or Native American, how many of us are sitting in academia, sitting in corporate America, sitting in City Hall, in police departments, in fire departments, and we are trying to go along to get along, not willing to shake the foundations, and all we're simply saying is, well, let's have all deliberate speed. Well, anybody who read that, when Thurgood Marshall and his team went back and discovered what it meant was, it was a secretary, they were all excited in the room, and they were talking about this whole victory. And she said, why are y'all celebrating? All deliberate speed means slow. And looked at each other and said, oh my God, what actually happened? And here we are, still trying to deal with Brown versus Board of Education in 2018. You just had a judge in Alabama tell a largely white community, you cannot create your own school system and discriminate against African Americans. In 2018, they were trying to do that in the state of Alabama. Don't think for a second, with all the talk about how great things have gone and how we've achieved so many different things, how we still are not trying to live in the past. When you have folks who are using the ballot box trying to suppress African American votes, but not just African American votes, the votes of young whites as well, elderly as well. In Wisconsin, some 200,000 people could not vote in the last election because of voter ID. That was by design. The same thing happened in Pennsylvania and Michigan and North Carolina and Florida. You have a ballot initiative. They got more than 1 million signatures where you will finally have on the ballot in Florida restoring the rights of the formerly incarcerated. That's 1 million people who have not been able to vote. When you begin to understand what is happening in our school systems, where we have folks who are saying, well, we're on equal footing when it comes to college. You can't tell me when we're on equal footing when it comes to getting into a college if we're not on equal footing in our high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. We can't sit here and just be so excited when you have a Department of Housing and Urban Development that's just waived one of the Obama-era rulings allowing for cities to have to be forced to submit their plans to end segregated housing. Here you had Dr. Ben Carson who was allowing that to happen, and don't think for a second I had not challenged him, and I challenged Trump to his face on the very issue, because there's no way in hell in 2018, in the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, we're going to be quiet when it comes to ending segregated housing. That simply will not happen. And we cannot be lulled to sleep and somehow thinking because you have black administrators and you have a black mayor and black folks on the city council that some things are going to magically change. Because trust me, Charlottesville, Virginia happened even though Doug Wilder was elected governor in the 1980s. Don't think that somehow race left America because Obama was elected president in 2008. That was progress, but that was not the realization of Dr. King's dream. That was simply a part of the continuum. The only way we're going to change what is happening in America is when people of conscience get off their butts, get out of their houses, begin to get involved, and begin to say, I will not allow America to look the same tomorrow as it looks today. And some of you are sitting here looking at me right now saying, look, I'm 60 and I'm 70 and I'm 80. I did my part. I did all that sort of stuff. I want to rest and relax. I dare say as long as there's breath in your body, as long as you are able to open your mouth, as long as you're able to type with your fingers, then you must be willing to stand up to change what is happening in this country, because we cannot have the same America in 2058 as we have in 2018. We should not be satisfied in the students fighting for the same thing today and tomorrow that we are fighting for today. No, every generation must say, our generation is going to change what is going to happen tomorrow, because the decisions you make today will affect your bloodline, your children's 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 children. A simple decision today could alter the course of your family's history. So the question is whether or not we're going to have the audacity to stand up to power, look it in the eye and say, whether you are Democrat or Republican, we are not going to accept status quo. Status quo when it comes to education, when it comes to housing, when it comes to economics, when it comes to high schools, elementary schools, middle schools, colleges, when it comes to postgraduate, when it comes to every facet of American life. Because if we accept what is happening, it will never change. And if we accept what is happening, what that says is we have failed the very people who are fighting for the last 50 plus years. I cannot stand here before you and say I'm willing to fail my ancestors because I didn't use my voice and my power to be a difference maker. No one knows. No one knows how long they have on this earth. But you better bet as for every day you have, it's about changing something. None of us know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. But I dare say if you do nothing, nothing will change. But if you do something, it will change. And it also means that you might be willing, you have to be willing to challenge some people who look like you. When the comments are being made at the dinner table, when the sly comments are being made at lunch, you got to be there and say, that's not right. Somebody might be your friend, but you're not a real friend if you let them say the nonsense. Hill Harper's my fraternity brother. He's an actor, and Hill said he was playing basketball with a brother, and Hill said, hey man, how's your daughter doing? And he said, well, I haven't seen her some time because her mama's tripping. He'll say, whoa, hold up. What do you mean you haven't seen your daughter? He'll say, we can't keep hooping. He's like, why not? He said, you can't make time for me, and you haven't made time for your daughter. He said, I can't be your friend if I'm unwilling to challenge you on being a father. Which means that some of us, whether we white or black or Hispanic or Asian, must be willing to look at some folks who look like us. And when they make comments, say, no, you're not going to say that around me. And let me correct you in what you're saying. See, we got to have folks who are willing to see the inequities and not talk diversity and not talk inclusion, but make it happen. And I know somebody's saying, yeah, but even if I'm the president or the COO, I don't have that kind of power. That's a lie. Al Newhart, rest in peace, CEO of Gannett, was the largest media company in the country. And Al Newhart said, we are going to change diversity in this industry. I'm going to tie all of your bonuses to your diversity numbers. He said, and if you object to the new plan, you can more than leave the company. And there were some people who came to him and said, Al, this is wrong. He said, that's fine. Let me know when you're leaving. And they said, well, it's not fair that you would tie our bonuses to diversity numbers. He said, well, I clearly can't get your attention anywhere else, so let me tie it to your money. I told you there's only one department that shares a lawn with the White House, Treasury. Understand America? Talk to the money. NFL responded to Colin Kaepernick because of the money. Montgomery bus boycott, money. Lunch counters, money. America, you mess with America's money, you get America's attention. John LeGrand, CEO of FX Cable Network, he began to look at his numbers and he began to say, he said, guys, I need to understand, how is it that 88% of all of the TV showrunners are white men? He said, America is more than 50% women. Where are the women showrunners? Where are the women directors? Where are they African American? Where are African American? Where are Hispanics? So John sends one email and says, this will change. 6 months later, half of all the new shows they had minority showrunners. He said, there are stories out there right now that can be told that will be successful if we stop thinking America is run by white men. John is a white man. Al Newhart was a white man, but they were white men of conscience. They were willing to challenge folks who looked like them because they said this can't continue because somebody has to say something. Because he understood how America is changing. And so we need more Al Newharts, more John LeGrants. We need folks who are in positions of power who will look across the table and say, I will not accept the notion you can't find. Then you better start looking at some different places. I won't accept the idea that we can't raise the next generation of entrepreneurs. No, your job is to train and teach them. What it requires is it requires people to be willing to challenge others to be better. And the fundamental concern that I have is whether or not we are willing to look folks in the eye and to say that we made some progress, we've done some good things, but we will not rest on the status quo. See, we must have the same sense of urgency for freedom the folks who were living during slavery. We must have the same fervor for education for slaves who said, if reading can cost me my life, there must be something about that book that's powerful. We must have, like we had white abolitionists, we must have folks who are white today who understand that freedom for all is critically important. They must say, like Jackie Robinson did in his book, I Never Had It Made, if one of my brothers or sisters who doesn't look like me isn't fully free, neither am I. Because as long as African Americans in America are not fully free, white America isn't fully free. And that must be the mission for every single one of us. But let me be perfectly clear with you. What I'm laying out is going to require you to fight. It's going to require you to be uncomfortable. It's going to require you to get out of your nice sweet spot and realize you might have to say something and do something that's going to make you uncomfortable. It might force you to go inward and begin to say, let me look at my own life and what I have been able to do. But I'm saying it's going to require a fight because America has never given up anything without a fight. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. He then said, you must agitate, agitate, agitate. What this means is we got to have freedom fighters in 2018. We can't sit in this auditorium and celebrate previous 50 years of folks who fought, because they were not folks who laid down, who were minced words, who were easygoing and nice. No, there were people who said we have to be difference makers. They might call you a troublemaker. They might say you loud. They might say, why are you stirring up trouble? But as John Lewis said, you got to go out and make good trouble, because that's what it's going to require. At some point, we got to have people in 2018 who have a sense of urgency and who dare to fight. And I mean fight every single day. You might have to fight your family, your friends, your church members, your co-workers. You might have to fight your fraternity brothers or sorority sisters. But I'm telling you right now, if you're willing to fight, we can actually change this country. When you change Buffalo, you can change New York. When you change New York, you can change America. But we got to have some folks who are willing to put their fighting shoes on, who are willing to get in their fighting stance, be willing to challenge some folks and say, we will not tolerate at the rate that we have been going. We can do this faster. We can do it better. We can be stronger. We can be more diverse and be more rich and more successful than where we are now. But if you are afraid to fight, do me one favor. Step aside and move the hell out of the way while the rest of us are willing to fight. And I dare say, if you look somebody in the eye, and when they say, well, what do you mean fight? I say, I mean fight. We're going to show up every single day. City council, school board, to the assembly. We're going to show up to the Board of Regents meeting. We're going to go to the administrative meeting, because we do not have the time to sit around and be quiet and nice. This requires this generation to put some skin in the game. So 50 years from now, when you have this very event, they're going to be celebrating what you did and not talking about what happened in 1950 or 1960. And I say this here, tell somebody like my frat brother Bertha Woodson Tandy said, we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice. All right, so we have Q&A. So here's the deal. We have, you got microphones, right? All right, where are the microphones? All right, so I need how many microphones? No. I need one person on each mic. So here are the rules. We don't need you to hold the microphone. We got it? Keep your hands in your pocket. So I need one person on that microphone, one person on this microphone. No sermonettes. Questions. You go long, I will cut you off. So I'm letting you know. So let's have one person at each microphone. Let's not have a long line. Let's have one person at each microphone. So let's go with the first question. I got y'all scared? What's up? I won't bite. All right, here we come.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Thanks for coming to Buffalo. This was truly inspiring and rousing talk that you gave, and I feel really energized. And I'm wondering how best to build coalitions between white and black communities.
So here's the first thing. What happens is, so I'm gonna do this in the reverse. So one of the things that happens is, we spend lots of time worrying about who doesn't show up, how many people should have been there, when the reality is every revolution in the history of the world always started with one person and an idea. And so the start has to be, this is what I think, what do you think? Well, I like what you have to say, so I like that as well. Okay, so what we're gonna do? I'll give an example. In Chicago, Bill Hybels is the pastor of Willow Creek, the largest white church in Illinois. Reverend James Meeks is senior pastor of Salem Baptist Church, the largest black church. And the two of them became friends, and they said, we need to begin to have this conversation about black churches, white churches, and how so different we are. And so they began to have these dialogues with one another. Two of them begin to break bread and begin to talk and begin to communicate and begin to share with one another. They then said, now let's take this thing to our congregations. And so Hybels and Meeks would come to Salem Baptist Church and have this conversation. Then they would go to Willow Creek. And if you want, you can actually go to YouTube and you will see a lot of these conversations they had. And so then they said, well, we're going to take this thing to a different level. So what they then did was they switched choirs. So the Willow Creek choir went and sang at Salem. That was different for black people. Black people used the bass guitar, not string guitar. Salem choir went to Willow Creek. They were not used to the drums and the saxophone and all those instruments. So then they said, we'll take it further. So they then switched youth ministries. So the youth ministry at Willow Creek went to Salem and they led worship. They did the whole service. Then the Salem youth ministry went to Willow Creek, the exact same thing. Then it got to a point where some members of Salem and some members of Willow Creek began to talk about them literally buying homes in the same neighborhood to live next to each other. But it all started as a conversation between two people. And so you can't build a coalition of groups unless two individuals in different groups or different entities begin to have sort of that conversation. Dr. King talked about the table of brotherhood. What he was saying is we need to be able to sit down across from one another to have that dialogue. And that, unfortunately, is the problem for so many people. We are afraid to have those types of dialogues because we sit there and we say, well, you know, I don't know what you're going to say and what I'm saying. I mean, I'm scared to say this, but that's the whole point of the dialogues, that we must be willing to have those level of deeply impersonal conversations. And so that, to me, is where I think we failed, because I talked about being able to die with one another. If you begin to really assess your life, ask yourself, who do I eat with? If I'm white, have I invited black folks to my dinner table at my house? If I'm black, have I ever invited somebody white to my house for dinner? Reverend Jim Wallace says that when he goes to folks' homes, he loves to look at all their stuff. He looks at their artwork, the pictures they have, their DVD collection, and their books to see how diverse their world is. He said all of that tells him exactly what kind of person they are. Not what they say to him at church, not what they say at work, but how they live. And so that's how you start building coalitions. And so some of the greatest coalitions actually started literally at the dinner table. And that's really, I think, the starting point to actually building that. And so last point to this here, I had a black student at Texas A&M. She came up to me, we had a journalism conference. She said, Roland, you know, I was hearing you talking about how you love Texas A&M. She said, but, you know, I just don't understand because, you know, I don't feel as fully welcomed by white students at A&M. And we're about maybe 3% black, 48,000 students. And so she said, so we'll be in the cafeteria and we'll be eating lunch and, you know, black students with each other and the white students with each other. And I said, okay. I said, have you ever went and sat with white students? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, have you ever decided to go sit with the white students and have lunch? She's like, no. I said, so what you're telling me is you want white students to do what you're unwilling to do. It never dawned on her. She was waiting for, I said, let me help you out. And this is what I think people need to understand. I said, do you realize how many white students at Texas A&M grew up in communities that were no black people? I said, do you know how many black students who come to Texas A&M live in neighborhoods where there were no white people? I said, that's the reality. I said, so if you are unwilling to do something and you trying to figure out why they're unwilling to do something, because both of y'all are thinking the very same thing, somebody has to go sit down at the table. Somebody must take the first step. That's where you start. Question. Step close to the microphone.
A friend of mine asked me one day, said, you watch Roland? I said, Roland, I've heard of that. So
I'm fine. I'm good. Go ahead.
I never heard of it, but I said, when we come on, they said, be on 7 a.m. on every weekday. And Mr. Martin, I heard Roland speak. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, I mean, you would just serve Michael and the whole crew. And the point I'm making is that there's so many African American men and women out there that I'm a reflection of, that some kind of way we don't get that information. It seems like it's right here at our doorstep. A lot of people in Buffalo don't even know about Roland Martin. A great percentage of our community, I drive a taxi, and I said, you heard? No, most of the time, and I'm saying, what do we have to do to get people to understand the fact that we bring incredible information to the table?
Well, here's how you start. I mean, the deal is just here. We now live in a different world where social media has changed our game. Just understand, as I am standing here, just to understand. So we probably have hit, I can't pull the number up until it's over, but probably on Facebook alone, we probably are sitting at 50, 60,000 views. YouTube, 10, 12,000. Periscope is probably around 3,000. And so the ability to be able to tell folks, go to YouTube, go to Facebook, go to Instagram, go to Twitter. People come up to me and they say, man, what books would you recommend? I say, go to Facebook and go to Twitter, type in hashtag Roland's Book Club. You see every book that I've read the past 5 or so years. And so that's how we're able to spread our message. But see, here's the piece though. That's why I say it's coming upon us to be able to share the message. How many folks are here pastors? Raise your hand. You're a pastor. Who's a pastor? It's happening all the time. Tell me if I'm lying. Pastor, I wish so-and-so could just come to church and hear you speak. And you looking at them, and I know y'all pastors trying to be nice, that's why I couldn't be one of y'all. I told y'all that's my wife. And you look at them saying, fool, invite them to church or go pick them up and bring them with you. Or they don't need to come hear me, because if you're not praying with them or sharing the word with them, then what are you doing? Oh, so you want me to do all the work. So what I mean is we must be able to utilize our own individual power to begin to share the word. So if you ask somebody a question, hey, you ever heard of Roland Martin? No, you should say, is Roland Martin on Twitter? Roland Martin on Instagram? Roland Martin on Snapchat? You see him on Facebook? And that's his channel on YouTube. You need to go listen to it right now. They might or they might not. But that's one of the ways we do it. And I don't worry about who. That's why I meet people and I say, how you doing, Roland Martin? Like, I know. I say, well, first of all, I never assumed. And so social media now allows for us to get away from the gatekeepers. So I don't need MSNBC or CNN or even TV1 to begin to communicate with the world. I can go directly. And that's how the game has changed. And so we now live in a different space where we can actually take advantage of that. And again, we just do it. We just begin to share that level of knowledge. And I can tell you, I had a dude on the plane the other day. He said, are you Roland Martin? It was a white guy on the plane. I'm like, yeah. He said, man, that interview you did with that white supremacist Richard Spencer, oh my, and he just started talking about it. I'm kind of like, I guess you saw it. But he didn't get TV1, but he saw it on YouTube.
What could we as a people ourselves have done collectively? When you hear about Oprah Winfrey and LeBron James, that's a guy who come on. What could we have done, Roland, to keep you from going out there? What could collectively?
So here's the deal. Don't make the mistake of asking, well, what could this person done, that person done? First of all, Oprah's network doesn't have any news show. That's not what they do. That's first. The second, use Bernie Sanders' campaign and others. he raised all his money from people who gave $27, $30. And so we have the ability to be able to fund and do things ourselves without an Oprah writing a check. See, the issue is not what Oprah will do. She's one person. The question is, what can we do as a collective? I tell everybody, again, if they go to my site, rolandsmartin.com, if they put in their email when we have the announcements ready for what the next venture is, then you'll be able to see exactly what that is. That venture that we are working on will have a component for folks to be able to assist us to do what you're talking about. I've gotten phone calls from very prominent folks in Hollywood, in corporate America, say, Roland, what's your next move? And those folks are ready to assist. But what we're working on, it has to be about the people. When I say the people, whether they're black, whether they're white, Hispanic, or Asian, because we have to have truth tellers who are willing to say what other people are scared to say. And don't think for a second that just because you see somebody black, Latino on mainstream networks that they still have the power. Understand, I was the host and managing editor of News One Now. The final editorial decision rested with me. I didn't ask somebody, could I do this commentary? I just did it. And so you have to have that level of independence, because sometimes you have to say what is going to make other people uncomfortable. And so trust me, when we unveil the announcement, you'll be able to, exactly what you're talking about, you will have an opportunity to be able to help make that a reality. So just go to rolandsmartin.com, just put your email in, and then once we drop the announcement, just follow me on social media, you'll see the announcement there as well. But trust me, we're putting something together that's going to be strong and very powerful. Question?
Thank you very much again for coming out tonight and talking to us and inspiring us. Earlier, you mentioned the wealth gap between white Americans and African Americans being $100,000 or
$110,000 for whites, $5,000 for African Americans.
Yes. During the next 50 years, what are some of the things, and this is kind of a two-part question, but it's one in 10. What are some of the things that we can do to engender the value of entrepreneurship and investing and wealth building amongst ourselves?
First thing on entrepreneurship, right now you have 2.6 million black-owned businesses in America. 2.5 million of those have one employee. 7 years ago, there were 1.9 million black-owned businesses. You had 1.8 million that had one employee. The problem is, when you have 1.9 million black-owned businesses, they did an average revenue of $110,000. Today, you have 700,000 more black-owned businesses. They're only doing $78,000 in revenue. And so the issue is not, do you have more black-owned businesses? Do you have black-owned businesses with capacity and capital? That's the fundamental issue. And so what has to happen is you have to be able to have folks who utilize their power to be able to do it. So the question then becomes, if you're at this university, I began to say, who are the vendors being used? How diverse is that vendor list, the supplies and products being purchased by the university? And then let's say you have a nice diverse list, but you have some folks who have a business who would love to bid on something, but they don't have the capital to be able to float their businesses for a period of months. Well, this university puts its money in certain banks. And so my suggestion to do exactly what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta. In 1973, before Maynard Jackson was elected mayor, African Americans received 0.0012% of all city contracts, which means for every $100 spent, the black folks only got 12 cents. So when Maynard Jackson became mayor, one of the things that he did was break up the contracts when it came to become a prime contractor. So because if you were a small black firm, you couldn't bid on the large contracts. But even if they got the contract, they could not have the capital. And so he then called the banks into the city, called the banks and said, I want you, just so-and-so has a contract from the city of Atlanta. You know we're going to pay him or her. I want you to extend a line of credit to them for the project. The bank said, no, we're not doing that. Maynard said, I expected that. City treasurer, please come in. I want you to remove the city of Atlanta's money out of their bank. So think about this. And I don't know how much Canisius drops in banks. But if you have minority vendors who can do a job, but they can't float their business, use the power to say, banks, come here. We are putting X amount of dollars in your banks, which you are leveraging for deposits. These are companies doing business with our university. They need to be able to have access to lines of credit. The city of Buffalo can do the exact same thing. Your mayor and the city council can do the exact same thing. This is not an affirmative action policy. This is very simple. This is a vendor with the city or the school. We want you to extend a line of credit. And if the bank say no, you can say, we will remove our city money from your bank and place it with a bank who will do business with our vendors. That means in your own small way, you could literally change the lending opportunities in a city. That's one way. Two, you have to begin to encourage black-owned businesses not to think small. Part of the problem is you don't have capacity. And so I would then begin to say, in this city here, if you have, look at your major contracts, if somebody says we don't have the capacity to bid, encourage M&A, mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures. Because if one firm is too small and that firm is too small, the two of them together could very well be big enough to bid on a larger contract. You're not going to grow your business unless you have M&A. You simply is not going to happen any other way. That has to happen as well. The other piece when it comes to investing is we have to actually make this thing and break it down as simple as possible for people. And so one of the things that I did, Arrow Capital Management, John Rogers started that, African American, and so he has a mutual fund company. And so you can open an Arrow Capital account for a minimum of $50 per month. Most people, when they think of mutual funds, I got to have 1,000, 5,000. No. And so I've told numerous people that they literally went home and they went to the website and they said, wow, he wasn't lying. They opened an account that night with a minimum of $50. Do understand, if the average black family has $5,000 in wealth, and if you save $82 per month, in 1 year you would have saved $1,000. You would have saved 20% of the average wealth of a black family in America by saving $82 per month. And so we must begin to encourage folks to do that. We must utilize our power to shut down these payday lenders in various neighborhoods, but also challenge these banks to also change their banking practices, which also means that you might have folks in here, whether you're a church or whether you're other institution that's opening credit unions to allow people to be able to open accounts at those credit unions. And so we must begin to look at this thing in a much different way. And financial literacy is critically important. But do understand that also was a result of neglect in this country. Lincoln created the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bank was located right across the street from the White House. He gets assassinated 2 months after that. Pretty much from that point on, for more than 20 years, the Freedmen's Bank is fledgling. Frederick Douglass put the equivalent of $20 million into the Freedmen's Bank to keep it afloat. That was created to teach freed slaves financial literacy. And so when we go through America, African Americans who were free slaves began to acquire land, but what happened? And land began to be stolen from them as a result of Jim Crow. And so we have to understand that that happened. The theft of thousands of acres of black land contributes to the existing wealth gap because that was land they couldn't pass on to their children and their children's children. And so all of a sudden you had folks who had land stolen in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, who were forced to move to places like Chicago and Gary, Indiana, and Detroit, living in slums when they owned 100, 200, 300 acres. And so that's the history, again, of America, the side that we don't like to talk about. But you have to have massive financial literacy, and you must be able to utilize churches, you must be able to utilize fraternities and sororities, institutions along those lines to do so, which is also why I encourage fraternities and sororities to have investment clubs where you're able to pool your resources. And that's another way to actually do it. Cool?
One extra piece, and that was phenomenal. One extra piece, how can we engender trust between us and the actual businesses?
This is very simple. Trust is established one-on-one. That's a personal thing. That's a personal thing. You can't create that any other way between I got to be able to trust you, but that's relationship building. And that's the only way it starts. Relationship building. Question?
Roland, how factual is the mainstream media news as it pertains to black issues? When you, let's say we compare Fox News to a CNN. The reason why I'm asking that question is because I would watch NBC and then I would watch News One on the same news issue, and it would be totally different news issue. So I think many times we look at Fox News and we think that there's a difference between Fox and CNN as it pertains to issues concerning us, and I'd like to get your comments on
Well, it's very simple. The bottom line is when you, if you talk about those networks, you don't have anybody black who's in control. When you watch News One now, I was in control. If I didn't agree for the story, it wouldn't be on TV. So same thing happens there. And that's part of the problem. You literally have mostly white executives at those networks. Now, they do some stories, they do some things that are good. Problem, though, is positions of power. The issue is not whether you're on air. The issue is who's the producer, the executive producer, who's the executive in charge, who's the vice president, who's the CEO of the CEO. All of that matters. The difference for me is I didn't have any of that. I had no interference whatsoever in terms of what we were able to do. And so that's one of the reasons why I insisted on being host and managing editor, because I wasn't going to let somebody, I had already run 3 black newspapers. So I was already the boss in terms of had final authority. I remember when I was at CNN, I was filling in for Kimmel Brown for 2 months. There were white producers who were very uncomfortable and who were upset. One of them got so mad, she asked to be transferred off the show because they thought I should just been happy hosting the show, filling in for her. I said, no. I said, I'm going to have a say-so in what is done on this show, editorially. And understand, for several of them, they had never had an African-American who had veto power. They had never, and so they had never had somebody who looked at them and said, who would question their news judgment. And some would say, well, had I played the cards differently, I might have gotten my own show after that. Well, if that's what I need to do to get my own show, I wasn't going to play that game. And so that's why you do not have diversity in these media companies. You need to ask Jeff Zucker, the CEO of CNN, how many African Americans are in decision-making positions on your executive team. Ask that question. Ask the same question to MSNBC, and to Fox News, and to ABC, and to NBC, and to CBS, and to PBS. And I can tell you what the answer is. Not many. But you have to ask the same thing about Wall Street, and academia, and the same thing about corporate America. That's the problem. You, again, 50 years of progress, technically fully free, 48 of them. That's why. In the Kerner Commission report, which was released in 1968, said there are 2 Americas, 1 white, 1 black, and they said media was largely responsible for what happened in the 67 riots. They began to examine media, and the reason you begin to have an influx, not an influx, but the start of blacks and Hispanics in mainstream media was because of that same Kerner Commission report in 1968. Our newsrooms were devoid of people of color. Question?
Well, first of all, see, it's been a pleasure over the years watching you see MSNBC and thanks to radio. While she was here, she very representative.
Step close to the microphone.
Yeah, what I want to ask you, we hit on a lot of points tonight, as far as it's an article in the paper today, concerning, we know better off, blacks are better off than they were in 1960. They are now, as far as the prison population, to jobs and wealth, as you spoke on. When you sit around, we look at the versus my they say all policies are local. We just say, for instance, had 4 black graduates class in the fire department, police department. We're for like 45% of the population here in the city. We've had majority black councils, council people, for instance, on our boards, we have black mayors and things such as this. How can we get the point across here when I see a graduation, for instance, of police officers, and I see 40 whites and 3 blacks, and yet still we're 45% of the population? That's a big deal, that's the reality. Then you'll ask the person, about it, and they'll say, well, we don't know why, but you can see it across the state.
No, actually, anybody, first of all, anybody who says they don't know why that's the case is a liar. I mean, it's just true. Because I don't care who you are. I mean, there's an explanation exactly how you got to that particular point. And so what happens is, and look, it's not just Buffalo, you see it in Chicago and other places as well, because remember, we were frozen out of those jobs for so long. And so one of the things that we have to begin examining, for me, everything for me, when I hear a question or an issue, I always go back to, I keep going back and back and back and back to then what's the root? And so I would then say, okay, for police department and fire department, what are the requirements for the job? What are the requirements that you establish? And then you have what you often have, you have educational requirements as a result of that, which then says, okay, the pool of applicants, where are they coming from and what are their high schools like? Well, I then got to deal with what are their middle schools like? Because the middle schools are a feeder to the high schools. Well, what's the elementary schools like? Because they're the feeder to the middle schools. And so, if you want to see the end result education system, just look at what you just described. Because you are not positioning people for that level of success. Second of all, it also goes to recruitment, how you're able, what is your particular narrative? And so one of the failures of people to understand is that, again, if you're white in America, your view of police is totally different than black folks. It is. You have a lot of little white kids going, I want to be a police officer one day. A little black kid said, I'm running from a cop. I'm not trying to. I mean, you have to understand that narrative, which then means for a police department, how do you then utilize your African American police officers in terms of being able to recruit? So let me just use a university for example. So most universities that have sports programs, they know how to recruit black athletes, but somehow can't recruit black people in academics. So I've told numerous university presidents and admissions directors, it's very simple. When you go into the home of a kid and you're trying to recruit them and they are a star DB, what you're going to do is you're going to say, here are the other defensive backs who came through our university, and this is how many of them got to the NFL. How many times have you seen a university say, here are the African American graduates of our university who are now CEOs of their own companies? Right. It's the same thing. I mean, I told the Texas A&M University president, I said, Dr. Young, I said, we had an issue at the university. I said, Doc, look, I said, the white Aggie story is different from the black Aggie story. I said, white Texans, they have 3, 4, 5 generations of Texas Aggies in their families. I said, black folks don't. I said, so you can't come talk to black folks with the same, this is the Aggie way, where they have no idea what the hell you're talking about, because they're none in their family. I said, second of all, Doc, you gotta understand who black people are two things. We're disloyal and we're trustful. If we don't know you, we ain't trusting you. If we know you, we trust you. And I said, so Dr. Young, if you're going to recruit some students, they don't know you. I said, I can put 1,000 of them in a room. They know me. He said, so what you're suggesting is, if we have an event and we're trying to recruit black students, I should just simply do an introduction of you and go sit down. And I said, precisely. I said, because I will do a better job of recruiting them than you, because here I am, an African American who's explaining to them what my experience was like going to Texas A&M, and I know how to speak to them in a way where that parent then goes, okay, now I understand, I can trust what he says. The exact same thing happens, I think, when you talk about police departments and fire departments. It's the narrative, understanding how do you tell a different story that's going to connect with that potential recruit in a different way. To me, that's what the city should also be examining.
In New York State, we live here, state York State is arrested, for instance, and say something innocent of crime. When New York State, instead of having what they may call expungements, what they have is something they call sealed. Anything sealed can be open. You know, how do we get our legislators to get back to expungement?
Pure pressure. Legislators know one thing: pressure and votes. And if they feel as if they might lose, then they will change. It has to be pressure.
Thank you so much for coming and giving us this wonderful talk. So my question is that there is many people who get uncomfortable when discussing the topic along the line of race relationship in America. So suggesting that bringing up such kind of topic only create more attention and amount to blame the current generation for mistakes that they did not do. So what is your response? Should we forget about the past and move forward? Or
no. You can't forget about the past when the past created what happened today. You can't. You can't. But you have to understand when somebody says forget about the past. Why they are saying that? Because they don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation. Who in America forgot about 9/11? No, I want you to understand something. You want to forget what you were trying to forget. America says Iran has been horrible since they overthrew the American embassy in 1979. Okay, I remember 444 days. But what did we do to Iran in 1953? When we overthrew Mossadegh, who was the Democratic elected prime minister, and installed the Shah of Iran. So you were 18 years old in 1953. You were in your 40s in 1979. See, America doesn't like to remember what somebody else did. Look, we must respond to what Russia did to our election. But you know we've done the exact same thing to other countries. If you want to understand this, go read Stephen Kinder's book, Overthrow. Do understand we did the exact same thing in Nicaragua, in Guatemala. We did the exact same thing in Chile with Allende. America has done the exact same thing. We, for the first time, somebody was successful in doing it to us. And people are mad as hell and pissed off. Well, this is what happens when you do dirty stuff. So anytime somebody says, well, we should move on, forget the past, no, it's not that simple. You simply can't do that. Dude cheats on his girlfriend. Maybe can you forget? Hell no, I ain't gonna forget. If a woman cheated on her man, he's not going to forget. Y'all gonna have some happy times, and one day he gonna have a flashback when you cheated. So when you mess up, you don't want to talk about what used to happen. But the reality is, unless you contend with what used to happen and you deal with it in the present, you cannot change it for the future. Okay?
Just to be clear, so what should we do to reduce the tension that
No, I ain't trying. See, again, you trying to make folks comfortable. Look, I can't undo what happened. But you have to be able to get somebody to understand that as long as you want to live in denial about what happened, it's going to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean we can't have a dialogue. It doesn't mean that we can't have an exchange of information. But as long as you're trying to deny what happened, then we got a problem. That's the problem. Question. Last questions here, No more questions, folks. Go. Point the microphone down, please.
Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you. How do you encourage young people, African American young people, to vote? When I try to register them, sometimes there's nothing is going to change. It's a waste of time.
And what do you say to them? No, what do you say to them? What's your response when they say that?
I tell them that our people fought for us to vote.
No, that ain't gonna work.
Yeah, what do you say?
Because what you're doing, okay, in order to reach somebody, you must talk to somebody's language. Talk to somebody's language. How can I get you to understand this? All right? If I tell somebody black, Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed in Selma, 1965, that's why you should vote. They can look at you like, I ain't from Selma, that was 65. Okay? This is very simple. Why should I vote? Because Trayvon can't. Why should I vote? Because Mike Brown can't. Why should I vote? Because Rakia Boyd can't. Why should I vote? John Crawford III can't. Why should I vote? Eric Garner can't. When somebody says, well, I don't see how it impacts, then you say, what do you care about? Well, I care about all of these folks who are being wrongfully imprisoned. Really? So you know that's district attorneys. You know we vote on the DA. You know we vote on judges. We do? Yes. That's who decides who gets prosecuted. If somebody says, well, I care about our schools. Is your school board elected? Well, then somebody says, well, I don't like, Reverend Jackson did this in Ferguson. His brothers on the street corner, they said, and they said, man, Reverend Jackson said, are you registered to vote? They said, no. They said, you want to see the cop who killed Mike Brown get indicted? Yeah. You want to see him convicted? Yeah. He said, you know you can't serve on a jury unless you register to vote. You have to put it in terms where somebody understands how it matters to them. That's how you do it. You don't use our folks died for this. No. Use something that they can relate to go, never thought about it that way. Speak in their language to understand, to connect the dots. That's what I do. The same thing. It's issue-based. What do you care about and do you want to see a change? It's issue-based. That's how you do it. Go.
What do you think is the biggest problem facing the Black community? What do you think is the biggest problem with the issue today facing the Black community from achieving freedom?
From what?
Achieving freedom.
Oh, very simple. Education, economics. Period. Man, at the end of the day, if you don't have the education, you will not have economics. Numbers don't lie. Even though somebody African American with a college degree still makes on par with somebody white with a few college credits, the reality is, if you black with a college degree, you're gonna make more than somebody black with a high school diploma. You have to have that, otherwise you're going to be perpetually broke in this country and not be able to maximize power, which requires us to look at our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools differently. Look, I'm a huge charter school supporter. You know why? I support anything that I believe works. Now, if there's a charter school that's failing, I say shut it down. Traditional school that's succeeding, support it, replicate it, study it, I say keep building. But if it's failing, shut it down. I don't support failure, period. I don't make excuses. I don't see these say, well, no, I only support success. So if it's a homeschool, online school, charter school, magnet school, I don't care what it is. If it is successful, I'm going to support it. So that has to be the case. One of the best books you should read is James D. Anderson's book, The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935, where he details really how education became publicly financed in the South, how blacks cared so much about education. He lays out, it took him 10 years researching for this book. He said that blacks in Memphis, 92% of blacks in Memphis were going to college, going to school every day, when you had 41% of whites in D.C. who were going to schools. You had 500 schools that opened in the weeks after the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, black folks created collective bargaining. You had white plantation owners who could not get enough freed slaves to work, but black people who said, we'll work your land if you build a school on it for our kids. That's called collective bargaining. And so they understood, again, this is very simple. If you want to kill me because you caught me reading, what the hell is it about reading that is so powerful that I could lose my life doing it? That's how vital education is. And we have a problem because if by 2043 we are a majority minority country, we literally will not have the education numbers that are required to do those very jobs. And we are going to literally look like South Africa in 2043. And I got a serious problem with that, and that has to change.
Thank you.